So I thought it was about a year ago that I last uploaded an episode on the Porsche 917 build from nFOUW Collections. Turns out the last episode was uploaded in September of 2021. So that's a bit more than a year and way overdue for the next episode to go live. So I have been working on the chassis components of this build and finishing off most of it in this episode, and in the next one I will be moving on to some interior bits and probably the exterior. Maybe there's 1 or 2 videos to come on this build, but it won't be taking as long as it did before, as now I have pretty much all of the packages ready to go and start the final assembly. I believe I'm only missing package 25 at this point, but by the time I get to those parts, I'm probably or I will have probably already received that package in the mail and can finish this build off. So as most of you will probably know, all of these parts come pre-painted and simply just need to be assembled by either snapping them in place or using a screw and a screwdriver. I'm not going to show all of the screwing, and I'm also not going to show all of the gluing, as I'm not really gluing all that many parts together, just a couple of hoses so they don't pop off and they stay in place permanently. Now, if you're not interested in this kind of build, this is not the kind of regular stuff that I do. Usually I paint and detail all of the parts, but in this case I find it a little relaxing just to have to assemble it. And maybe in the future on some of the other builds for different cars that I have, I will go in a bit more detail, but at this point I simply just need to finish a couple of projects and get some stuff off of my bench and also finish the video series for you guys. So I'm not going to go into extreme details on these builds, but mostly just the assembly like I said before. Now if you're interested in purchasing one of these kits for yourself or any of the other collections from nFOUW, I will be leaving a link in the description down below to nfouwcollections.com where you can shop for your area. Now before you can assemble the main chassis, there are a couple of smaller sub-assemblies like the ones for the pedals, some others for in the front here, and the steering to be assembled first, and that can then all be put together on top of the chassis itself. Now one of those sub-assemblies was episode 1, and that is the engine, and that will be inserted into the chassis in this episode as well, but I still need to finish off a couple of suspension components and other chassis bits before that can be done. With the front subassembly for the steering wheel and some suspension components plus the brakes now completely finished, that can also be put in place with some springs that need to be carefully put in there. Some tubes need to fit together, and once that is all done, it simply just slides and clicks in place, and with a couple of screws it is kept there permanently. Usually with these 1/8 scale builds, the tires and wheels are the worst thing to assemble, as the tires need to be heated up a lot before they get a little bit soft and fit over the wheel, and then still it's a lot of squeezing, pushing, pulling, pinching your fingers, and just generally hurting yourself before they slip over. In the case of this 917, they've really figured out the design to make it a lot easier and not as tough on your fingers. You just simply put the two halves of the wheels into the tire, screw them together, and then you're done. With the two front wheels now in place, we can add a lot more of the skeleton for the chassis on the rear and then fit the engine in place. And after putting the engine in, connecting some wires, we can put a lot of the other side of the skeleton for the frame on too, and finish off some rear sections and add more details on there. Just like on the front, the rear also has some sub-assemblies for the suspension components. Those were screwed in and could then put onto the main chassis itself too. The bottom section of the chassis has now been finished, so I can move on to the top skeleton to go on top of the engine for the rear and also start holding some of the lighting components. A couple more bracing components for on top of the engine, some wheels, and then this part of the build is finished. Now, like I said, in the next one I will be moving on to the interior. That is quite a build of itself, and maybe also do the exterior in the same episode, but it could also be split up in two. Let me know what you want, one bigger episode or two smaller episodes, which should be able to come out sooner, or just wait a little bit longer for the final video. Again, let me know down in the comments. Would love to know your thoughts on this.